Well, thank you very much and a warm welcome from my side. I've been told I'm on a very, very strict time management, so I'm not going to waste a single second on inaugural jokes. Germans are not good at that anyway. The languages that were mentioned has to do with the fact that I'm mostly actually working in Asia. So you can say that I have been working within transformative and transformational societies, and I've seen some of the mess that is going on there. So without any further ado, I want to talk about the how, I'm not so sure actually, but somehow the how of transformation. And I want to introduce to you a method that I have developed in order to shape transformation. So you can pick up a copy maybe after this talk. Before we go into that, the how, which is obviously very, very difficult, let's just take a quick check where we stand today. And maybe if you can take that microphone down a bit, because it makes me crazy. So I think on the positive side, we can say that there has been some progress made by putting some of the very important issues that we all care about on the agenda. Hundreds of thousands of people have marched for a better trade regime than TTIP, to call for humanitarian treatment of refugees, to put an end to sexual harassment in the workplace, and to call for more ambitious efforts on climate change. And yes, you can also say that the democratic systems have responded in some way. Some resources have been shifted, some laws have been passed, and some treaties have been signed. However, I think we all agree that we are nowhere near the scope of change that we need to tackle the challenges of our time. On the very contrary, what has happened is that our societies are more polarized than ever. Public debate is frankly toxic, and we're experiencing a reactionary backlash on a broad front. So you could actually witness something that you could call a gridlock of the democratic system as we see it. So despite the efforts of millions of people, we are nowhere near the change. We need to tackle the challenges at hand to our democracies and so on. And on the very contrary, we're actually about to lose the ingredients we need for the good old no-frills technocratic management style that we're so used to, which is social peace, political stability, and in some country like Hungary and Poland, but also the US and the UK, actually the very democratic system in itself. So why is this so, and what can we do about it? So what I want to do right now is to really go into the engine room of politics, or for the digital kids here, the operating system, and actually look about what are the theories of change that progressive movements actually use to try to make change, and do they work, yes or no, right? And I would argue that in the progressive realm, there are right now 3 theories of change at work. Number 1, what I call technocratic incrementalism. Number 2, disruptive revolution. And number 3, emancipatory avant-gardism, right? So let's go to the first one and look at it, the technocratic approach, which tries to bring about change by incremental little steps, which is obviously the go-to practice in the governing apparatuses in Brussels, here in Berlin, and in your national capitals, and is frankly also best suited to work within the institutional framework of our representative democracies, and also until a few years ago has been largely embraced by many voters as the kind of cool and no-frills approach that, for instance, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel stood for. However, the very logic of this approach dictates that only the representatives of the status quo are on the table, and whatever compromise is reached between them can only be the lowest common denominator. So in terms of the political economy, such a technocratic compromise shifts resources within the status quo, is transactional, but it does not shift the paradigm. To shift the paradigm, what is needed is actually a political revolution, and this is barely driven, if ever, by the people who actually represent the status quo. Just to give you an idea how resilient the political economy actually is, just think about the very crisis that we have mastered over the last couple of years. Think about the financial crisis, the euro crisis, the refugee crisis, the climate crisis, and also all the others. The political economy in terms of which class stands to gain and which one is actually losing has remained largely unchanged. So we have to think about, is our testimonials, our civil society activism, all the policy papers that people like us write day after day, is that going to be enough to shake up a political economy which is so resilient? And there has been criticism here in Germany on the GroKo or the Klimapaket lately, where people are actually asking the question, can you really make transformative change by transactional means? The second revolutionary approach hopes for a disruptive event. And such events have happened out of nowhere. Think about the color revolutions. Think about the Arab Spring, right? A lot of people came out of nowhere and overthrew regimes that until a few weeks earlier were completely impossible to imagine. Also here in the West, but all of these movements have faltered very, very easily, and I think that is the problem. Here in the West also, systemic change has rarely been brought about these kind of one-off events. Despite all the huge numbers of people taking to the streets, think about Occupy, Indignados in Spain, Nuit debout, or the Gilets jaunes in France, or Unteilbar here in Germany, they have not changed the political economy of their respective societies. Let's see how Fridays for Future will do. And this has to do with the fact that groups with different interests and identities can come together to protest against something, but they have very little in common in terms of what they actually want together. Finally, there is this emancipatory avant-garde. So we're talking about movements like Me Too, Wir sind mehr, Zentrum für politische Schönheit, Extinction Rebellion that you've seen in action right now here in Berlin, who are convinced that they know what needs to be done, and they already start with changing their lifestyle and behavior and consumption patterns, and they call upon the rest of us to do the same. And again, they have very little to show in terms of systemic change, and this has to do with the strategies followed by these movements. Because I argue the focus of too many of these movements is on the individual, classical brainchild of the neoliberal age, right? So we are focusing on individuals' microaggressions and transgressions and lifestyles and consumption patterns, and we establish safe spaces, and we shame culprits, and we purify language, and we separate our waste and change light bulbs, but is that really transformational? And yes, of course, changing yourself and your lifestyle changes the world a little, but is it really working? What is working on the micro level, can that really work on the macro level? And I'm saying it cannot. First, because in a liberal democracy, everyone has the right to not join in. And second, in terms of the political economy, if you're up against concentrated power and vested interest, this kind of appeal to the moral higher self is very toothless. And that's actually the real difference between today's progressive neoliberalism and its historical predecessor, like the Leninist avant-garde parties. They just use mass-scale violence in order to move the society into their direction. All we have today is the appeal to a higher moral self. And this creates resentment by people who actually feel that their lifestyle and their identities are not being respected. So if every action triggers a reaction, every avant-garde kind of triggers its own counter-movement, the result, again, is political gridlock. Don't get me confused, of course, I'm all for a civil approach. My point here is that within this neoliberal framework, we have one problem. We do not see the structures. We do not see the question of material distribution. We do not see the asymmetries of power. We do not see class interest and actually our own class privilege if we talk about it. And if you look to France and you look at the example of the yellow vest, then you will see what will happen if you draw up a bill without consulting the people who actually have to pay for it. So all the culture wars that we see today lead to a political standstill. So what all of these approaches that I introduced to you do is they introduce some change, but not enough to tackle the enormous challenges that we have to tackle. So, now we heard what's not working. How can we actually shape the great transformation that is unfolding around us? First, and that I think is really important for us as progressives, we have to take a hard look at the political economy of transformation. Societal transformations, change of any kind, always creates winners and losers. And that's why people are so concerned about their status in the social hierarchy. Some are moving up, some are moving down. Actually, the outcome, social change in itself, is the outcome of social struggles between those who want to uphold the status quo and those who want change. Or if you prefer a more liberal terminology, transformation crises are the time when a society starts to renegotiate its social contract. So social peace, political stability, economic predictability, all the kind of stuff that we need in order to tackle the challenges at hand are only possible on the basis of a new social class compromise. A compromise which actually secures progressive gains by compensating the losers. That actually protects vulnerable groups, like immigrants, for instance, by keeping the social base for progressive policies as broad as possible, and of course also creates legitimacy for the democratic order. After the first industrial revolution and more than 100 years of class conflict, this social compromise was struck by social democracy. And I think what we need to do today is to negotiate a new social class compromise to shape our transformation of today. So we have to do the cumbersome, frustrating, unsexy, and sometimes nerve-wracking job of building this new class compromise as a basis for our society, but also in order to tackle these enormous challenges of climate change, the right-wing assault on our democracy, and digital capitalism. And yet, even if the end result is compromise, everything actually starts with struggle. And in this struggle, we, the progressives, are outspent, outmaneuvered, and overpowered by the alliance of the status quo. So the only way that we can actually shift the tide and win this struggle is by building broad societal alliances. And this is actually where the problem of the how lies, because building alliances between people with different interests and identities and worldviews is about the hardest thing there is. And I think it also shows you, if you think about things like the Women's March in the US, or if you think about Unteilbar here in Germany, it is fairly easy to mushroom these movements into the matter of hundreds of thousands and millions. But once people start to realize who is marching alongside them, they actually realize they don't have that much in common, and the whole thing falls apart. So some people actually find it morally wrong to make common cause with some of the people that are marching alongside of them. So if broad societal alliances are different to build our own interests and different to keep together around moral narratives, how can we actually build them? And this is where this method comes in, transformative change-making, TCM, which kind of combines narratives, framing, and catalytic projects, which used to be the trick. So everything starts with a very hard-nosed look at the political field, and the question is, where do we stand, and what kind of potential alliance partners are out there, and what kind of steps can we actually do together? This may not be, keep in mind, what we progressives want, but it actually creates tangible results and a momentum for change, which is better than the polarized shouting matches that we have right now. Second, and a little bit contradictory, as progressives, we need a utopian horizon. Only if you can tell a story about a better future, about a better society, people actually start to reassess the situation that they're in right now, start to recalculate the risks and opportunities, and redefine their interests. So by retro-building from the future, we can actually create the platform for a broad societal alliance. For good narrative, however, Hope is not enough. We also have to spell out what will happen if we do nothing. This is what Greta Thunberg is actually doing. It's a very powerful thing to talk about the threat. The nerds here in the room, including me, also have to talk about the opportunity windows. What kind of trends actually enable us to do that? But we also have to give confidence that such a thing has been done before and can be done again. And yes, it has to be the moral right thing to do. Then all politics is local. We need to translate narrative into action. This is what catalytic lighthouse projects are supposed to do, that are able to transform the situation step by step. The idea is to create local success stories and then mushroom them to make a difference on the national and global level. So what I'm trying to do is here to combine the ideas of all the approaches that I had introduced into one method. So if we want to shape the great transformation, we need, again, a clear-eyed understanding about the power structures of our society. We need to approach potential allies without ideological restrictions. We need a narrative about a better future where all allies can find themselves in. And we need concrete first steps that will serve as test cases of what can be done together and the confidence that more is possible. And this is where we'll end with one appeal. Please stop the moral outrage. Politics is a craft. We have to go back to the drawing table and relearn it. We need to be able to build these kind of alliances. The good news is we have all the tools that we need. Just try to use them more wisely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marc, for breaking the ice with your engaging talk. And now it's up to you. Has anyone a question? And I'm sure you have. And before we start with the Q&A round, it would be great if you could introduce yourself briefly and keep your question to the point, because we all know time is ticking. Please.
Do I need a microphone or just like that?
Just like that.
Okay, so the point is, okay, I'm Clement Schell. I'm doing mostly exchanges with journalists at the Berlin Journalism School.
You will get a micro, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, thank you. So my question is, you said we have to renegotiate the, what was it? The new class compromise. The question now is, do people feel like belonging to classes? And that is my because looking around here, there are so many people who are kind of in a class, highly educated, whatever, and for example, get high payments on a daily basis, much more than a construction worker at a Mercedes factory or whatever. Still, they have in average a much higher income. So is this my class or not? What defines class apart from income?
Thank you. Marc, what is your answer?
Well, actually, if you look at the work of Andreas Reckwitz or Claudia Kopic and other sociologists, you see that the class clash that is going on right now is not so much between the top 1% and the proletariat, if there is such a thing, but it's mainly a culture war between two middle classes, right? One of them that you may call the new, creative middle class is the academic class, which honestly is here in the room, right? And the other one is, people who actually may do better in material terms, who may actually have greater wealth and greater income than others, but do feel set back in terms of lifestyle and such things. And that's where all the culture wars actually start. So I'm not saying that one is right and the other is wrong. That's nonsense. What I'm trying to say is when you're in a hole, stop digging. Or stop the bleeding, basically. So I really find this example with the yellow vest, or if you see what's going on in Ecuador and other countries right now, very instructive. If you want to tackle such things as climate crisis, obviously we have to get the subsidies out of the fossil fuel sector. I think that's a fact. But if we do not start to think about what that actually means for the people who have to bear the cost, then we are constructing policies which are not really workable politically, and we are inviting the backlash that we're actually seeing. And if people have the feeling that this is happening again and again and again and again, and they have no stake anymore in this society and in this social contract, what they start doing is obstructing. And I think that's the psychology behind Brexit and such kind of things, that people just say, yeah, whatever. I'm not part of this anyway, so I'm taking your toy away, right? So I think stop the bleeding means that whenever we propose something in terms of policy, think about what that does to everyone in society and try to find a balance.
Okay, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Adana Shallow. I'm from the RSA in London, which is interesting right now. My question is about narratives, and you said that we have to build narratives that are more inclusive. I really want to know how to do that, because we have forces in our macro environment which promote division rather than inclusivity.
Thank you.
Well, let's have a quick look at those forces, and they're really goddamn good at what they're doing. If you listen to the language of the right-wing populists right now, they talk about system crisis, they talk about the establishment, they talk about the elites, they talk about Lügenpresse here in Germany, they talk about freedom of speech. So they're really, really good at reframing some of the concepts that we actually used to think are progressive. And what I'm arguing for is that we need to start to wake up and do the same. If you look at it from a Gramscian perspective, right, we need to actually win this framing war as well, right? So if they are good at it, we have to go back to the drawing board and really also become better, and just not in terms of individual terms and concepts, but always keep in mind the strategic objective of what needs to be done, and that is to build a platform for an alliance of people who do not have the same interest. And we, frankly speaking, suck at that.
Okay, I have seen here 2 more questions. Would you like to start?
My name is Tom Wohlfahrt from Denkzentrum Demokratie, a small Berlin-based think tank. Thanks for the inspiring talk. I wanted to ask about how would you describe the relation between the foundation that you're working for and the party that it's affiliated with when it comes to the question of being progressive or defending the status quo and breaking that kind of gridlock that the SPD sort of has been part of for the last 2 decades?
Thank you.
Well, besides the fact that I'm mostly working in Asia, where it's also very interesting because the transformation crisis are shockingly similar, by the way. It's like for us, we always think it's far away. It's not far away at all. Right now, if you think about social democracy, I think the fundamental problem is that there is no clear idea, what that political movement, I don't even talk about the party, but this idea for what kind of society it stands for and what kind of social groups it represents, right? And there is different ideas in the room what that could be. There is a very clearly cosmopolitan idea to say, look, we are in a post-industrial society, so let's represent the migrant workers and the click workers and the Amazon workers of today. There is no more proletariat, and that means you have to be an avant-garde and really have to be a no-compromise thing. There's a second school of thought that actually thinks, well, there is a historical reason for which these labor parties have been actually constructed in the first place. And right now, the danger is that all these people who do not feel represented are actually up for the taking by the right wing. Right? And if you see what Steve Bannon is doing here in Europe by telling right-wing parties to move to the left, but to become what we actually call national socialist, right? And if you listen to the kind of language that is emerging there, that they're abandoning their neoliberal platform and actually do move to the left, I think that's a vital threat to democracy, which this kind of school of thought would try to tackle. And the third school of thought would actually try to say, very similar to what I have been saying, and that's also a school of thought that I promote, is to say, So who is going to actually create these class compromises, these social contracts upon which our democracies are founded, right? So can there be a bridge? Can there be a consensus building that you keep these milieus together, right? And between these three schools of thought, the debate is ongoing right now, and I think it's a very fruitful debate, and we have to push forward. But I would argue, isn't that happening right now?
Okay, good. And one last question, and all the others, please keep your questions in mind. I'm sure that after the session we have time to discuss them with Marc. Here you go.
Catherine Decker. I'm working in the International Secretariat for Transparency International here in Berlin. And I would like to benefit a bit more from your insights also in Asia. So for me, this all sounds I can really follow that very well from a Western point of view. But what does it mean in, for example, a context like Asia? For me, I would challenge you a bit on, we have the tool, we just need to use them. Does really everyone has the access to these tools in order to use them?
That was just a pep talk to not keep you frustrated. But let me give you an example from the Philippines to show you what I mean. We have in the Philippines a very strong civil society, actually one of the strongest in Asia, right? Very vocal, very well organized, very courageous. You always have to think, these people end up in jail. Some of them are being tortured. So the stakes are a little higher than they are here. And yet, this civil society, with the political forces that are allies to them, have retreated very much in a very, very progressive corner, right? And they have very little in terms of discourse power, and they have completely lost in the polls, and they're not able to resist anymore. Right, so what happened is that you have an authoritarian strongman, they call him the Trump of Asia, right, Duterte, and he has been waging a war on drugs which has cost 26,000 people their lives. So the puzzle now is these very people which are so vulnerable are voting for this guy with majorities of 85 to 90%. So if you are progressive, you really have to step back and ask yourself the question, what part of the equation are we not getting? Why are they voting for this guy if he is actually victimizing us, right? So the societies are very similar to some of the things that are happening here, and I think the friends of the UK know that even better than the Germans in the room. They are hyper-polarized. There's almost no center anymore. Everything is shouting matches, and there's a complete inability to understand even what the others are saying. But my problem, and that's what I mean with the method of going back to the drawing table, is we really have to really look at the political economy and understand where we stand in the field. We have to understand the balance of force, and we have to understand the framing of the other side. Right? So these strongmen, Trump included, actually come from this, what linguists call the strict father psychology, right? So they're saying it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, everything is dangerous, but I'm the guy who actually, number one, protects you, and number two, punishes the wicked, right? They need to be punished, they need to be purged, they need to be killed, actually, in order to make that society strong and homogeneous again, a typical right-wing kind of narrative, right? And that is very appealing to the middle class. So what our progressive friends are saying, same as here, by the way, oh, look at the statistics. Crime is actually on the way down. There's not that many truck trafficking going on anymore. So why don't you understand? Or why are you so stupid? Right? That's what they actually mean. And no one's listening. They completely bounce off in the discourse. They have no Anschlussfähigkeit in the discourse, right? And I think that is a very valuable lesson learned. So what we do there with these people is actually really trying to come out of the corner and reorganize in terms of where do we want to stand as a broad societal alliance in the field, and who could be our potential partners.
Thank you very much, Marc, and thank you for your questions.
You can pick that up, yeah?